Hi, and welcome to the seventh video in our PowerShell 7.2 for Beginners series. In the last video, we took a look at some conditional statements with the if, else if, and else, and I kind of hinted towards that there is another one called a switch statement. So that's actually what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at switches and just how they compare to if, else if, and else statements. So I'm actually going to create a if else if statement in this video and show you how you would translate that to a switch statements and just kind of compare the two to see how they work. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started. So what I already have is I have my PowerShell script here, and I also have a file with 7 names inside of my folder, inside a folder called data, and it's just a test.txt file. So I'm going to be using this. This is the data that we're going to be using to go through our if statements and go through our switch statements. So let's actually go ahead and let's get started by creating a variable here. And that variable is simply going to store the path to our text file. Now, a very easy way to do that using Visual Studio Code actually is if you have your text file in the same folder that you're working in, you can actually come ahead and just hold, I think you have to hold shift. Actually, you don't have to hold shift. You could actually simply right click on it and click on copy path and then just do some double quotes and paste that in there. And that'll actually be the complete path to the file. So you don't have to type it all out manually all the time. You can actually just do that. And you can actually do that without Visual Studio Code just by opening up your file explorer, coming to the file that you want to reference. So let's come here, for example. And then for that one, now if you only right click, you do not get that option. But if you go ahead and you shift click, you actually get copy as path, and it would do the exact same thing. If I paste it in there, it actually already has the double quotes when you do it from the Windows Explorer. So that's just a handy little tip that you guys might be able to use to kind of write out paths a little bit easier if you don't want to type them out fully. All right, so once we have that file path, let's go ahead and let's get the content on that file. So we've seen this commandlet in a previous video. So we're going to create a variable called data, and we are going to use the get content commandlet, and we are going to pass in a path, and we are going to pass in our file path variable. So let's just go ahead and let's just run this to see what we get, and let's inspect our data variable. So once we look at the data variable, let me just see if I can scroll up here. All right, so we have, I think there should be, oh, there you go. So here we have Steve, John, Penny, Abby, Mike, Tim, and Richard. So we have all the names in there. So we can also, if we look at data.count, we will also notice that we have 7 names. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's just go ahead and let's create a very simple if, else if statement once again. And we're going to create one more variable, and we're just going to call it first name, and we're just going to set that to a data and then square bracket 0. Now, because data gets treated as an array, we can reference the first value of data just by doing data square bracket 0 and closing square bracket. So we're going to set that to first name. So now we have 2 things that we could really check. So let's go ahead and let's create our if statement. We're going to first do a if the first name is equal, let's check to see if it equals Tim here. Just spell that with proper cases here. Not that it matters, but we're just going to want to do that. And we're just going to do the right output of that. We're just going to say my name is Tim, and then else if the first name is equal to Steve. We're going to do another write output here. We're going to say my name is Steve. And let's do one more else if just to get a lot more examples here. We're going to say if the first name is equal to Richard, and we're going to say write output my name is Richard, and then we're just going to have an else here, and we're going to say that this is a write output I don't know my name. All right, so we have our first if statement, if, else, and else statement for the first name. Now, as we know, the first name currently is valued at Steve. So in theory, we should just get my name is Steve. So let's just make sure that this works properly here. And we get my name is Steve. So that is perfect. We know that it is working correctly at this point. So let's go ahead and let's create this in a switch statement. So the first thing for a switch statement, as you probably guessed it, the keyword is going to be switch. And we're going to do an open and close parentheses, and then we're going to put our value that we want to evaluate. So here we're going to put in first name, and then we're going to do an open and close curly brackets. And now we have to put in our cases. Now, because we're testing for a string, all we actually need to do is put in our string here. So let's go ahead and let's put Tim here in double quotes, and then all we need to do is put in a pair of curly brackets, and let's do, I'm just going to copy these outputs here, and then all we need to do, you don't need a comma or anything, you just come in on the line afterwards, and we're going to put in Steve. Again, we're just going to put open and closing curly brackets here, and we're going to put my name is Steve. And we are going to go ahead and we are going to put in Richard here. And we are going to do a copy that over. And then for our else statement in a switch statement is actually just called default. So this will be the default case. So if no cases get matched, it will use the default case. So let's just go ahead and let's test this out. So if we actually run this here, we get my name is Steve, which is perfect. That's exactly what we expected. Let's just change manually what the first name is. Let's go ahead and let's change that to Penny here. And let's just run this. So now, as we see, we're setting the first name to something that's not in any of the cases here. So we should see it run default. And there we are. So we have the I don't know my name. Now there is, some of you might actually detect already that I am missing something. Now for this case here, we won't actually encounter the problem. But in any case, when you have switch statements, it is always the best practice to put in breaks here to make sure that only one case executes, as long as you only want one case. Now, if you wanted multiple cases to potentially execute depending on the value, you don't have to put in the breaks, but if you do want it to work exactly like an if statement, you definitely want to put in the breaks here. So this is one example of a switch statement. Let me make one more example of a switch statement that's a little bit more complicated and actually has an expression to evaluate. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing the switch statement for the if else that we did in the last video. So where we were checking the number of lines in our file. So in our file today, we have 7 lines. So we're going to make a switch statement to check that. So we're going to do a switch here, and we're going to look at the data dot count, and we're going to do an open and closing curly bracket. Now, what you might be tempted to do in a case where you're evaluating like the count, what you might be tempted to do is you might be tempted to do a parentheses and then do a dash less than 2 open and closing curly brackets. And as you're going to see, it doesn't error or anything. So let's actually go ahead and let's actually just do this to show you guys what will happen. So let's do the write the output here, and let's just say this file has less than 2 lines. And let's go ahead and let's just say greater than, let's do less than 10, because that'll actually hit the 7 here. And we're going to do a write output. We're going to say this file has less than 10 lines, at least 2 lines. In theory, that's what we should think here. And then we're going to have our default case, and we're going to say that this write output, this file has 10 or more lines. All right, now we don't have any red squigglies, so if we run this, we should actually expect this second case to run. But as we can see, we actually get an error message, and our error message says LT, check the spelling of the name or path that was included, verify that the path is correct, and try again. So this message is very, very convoluted. It's not very clear. And that is actually because we actually wrote the cases completely wrong. So if you're trying to evaluate something in PowerShell, you're always going to want to make sure that you're wrapping it in curly brackets. And then what you'd actually want to do in this case is do a $_. So very similar to how we've seen getting a value from a pipe, you would do the $_, which will get the value from the data.count. And then we're going to say -LT for less than 2. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to change this one as well for less than 10. So let's do $_-LT 10. And let's go ahead and let's see if this runs. As you can see, it runs. We don't have any issues here, so that's perfect. Now let's add one more case to this one, and this is where we're going to see the need for those breaks. So let's do our evaluation. Let's do our $_, and we're going to say is equal to 7, because we know that we have 7 lines here, so we're just going to make a case that should definitely execute. So let's go ahead and let's say write output. This file has 7 lines exactly. And this technically should be at this point 8 if we were thinking in the order that we were having the if else if statements. That's what it would execute. So let's go ahead and let's run this here. Now, as you can see, we actually get 2 outputs. We get, now it evaluated, it saw that this case succeeded. So we run this, so it says this file has exactly 10 lines, but because we don't have the break, it will actually keep checking each case to make sure that it satisfies the other cases. So it actually comes down to here and it says 7 is less than 10, so this file has less than 10 lines and at least 8 lines. Now there are multiple ways to actually fix this. We could do the breaks on each line, which would instantly fix this as well. Because as soon as it hits the first case, it's going to say that we're done. It's going to write the output and then it's going to break out of it. So this file has exactly 7 lines. Another thing that you could do as well is you could use, so this one equals 7 is less than 2. And this one we could say is in parentheses and then do an 8.10. And this will be, if we run just this here, we'll see that we get the values 8, 9, and 10. So in theory, actually, because it's less than 10 lines, it should just be 8 to 9. So this will check to see if the number is in this range of numbers. So if you put a number dot dot another number, it will create an array of numbers, of all the numbers between those 2 numbers that you put at either end of the dots. So that could be another way. There are a lot of ways to write switch statements. It's definitely recommended to use switch statements if you're only evaluating one variable. You can definitely use a switch statement. It's very, very easy. It'll run a lot faster than an if statement, especially if you have the breaks. If you have an if statement, if statements are really, really good if you're evaluating multiple variables or if you need some nesting, or if you're just not quite sure that you could use a switch. But in most cases, you can actually use a switch statement one for one for the if else. It really just depends on how complex it's going to get. So you're always going to make sure you want to keep it readable. So you don't want like a lot of switch statements nested inside. You also don't want a whole bunch of if statements nested inside. So you're going to want to find that good medium of when to use a switch statement, when to use an if else statement. That usually comes with practice. So that would be the major differences between the two, is needing the break statements in each case in order for it not to continue checking all the other ones, because the if else if only checks the one case. As soon as one case matches, it is completely out of that if statement. So that is it for conditional statements in PowerShell. We've taken a look at switch statements and if, else if, and else statements. In the next videos, we're going to be taking a look at loops. So we're going to first look at a for each loop, and then we're going to be looking at some different kinds of loops that you can also do in PowerShell, like the for loop, the while do loop as well. So hopefully you guys will stay tuned for that. If you guys have any questions or comments on anything that you saw today, please let me know in the comment section. I would definitely be very happy to clear things up for you. Or if it's something that I could make a video that could benefit a lot of people, I will make a video for that as well. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Also, be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified when the next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.